The badge was stuck to my table when I arrived at the ballroom. It didn't say father of the bride, as it should have. Not even Owen Mitchell. The black letters, printed in large, centered font, were cruel in her simplicity. Nobody wants her. I stood there for a full 10 seconds, holding that piece of paper as if it were radioactive. All around me, the hall was bustling with activity. Waiters in immaculate uniforms circulated with trays of champagne. Guests dressed like magazine models laughed and greeted each other. And there he was, a 52-year-old man, discovering that he had been officially labeled unwanted at his own daughter's wedding. My name is Owen Mitchell, and until that morning, I believed I would be the proud father walking Rebecca down the aisle. For 24 years, he raised his daughter alone after her mother abandoned us when she was only 3. He worked double shifts as an electronics technician, saved every penny for her education, and never missed a school presentation or volleyball game. But apparently that didn't matter to Rebecca's new family. I looked up from the name tag and saw Clarissa Hartwell, the groom's mother, chatting animatedly with a group of elegant women near the bar. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than her 3-month salary and was gesturing with crystal glasses as if she were the queen of the place. When our eyes met for a brief moment, she gave a fake smile and turned her attention back to her friends. It was Clarissa who organized everything. Rebecca's dream wedding, as she liked to say. Clarissa, who in 6 months managed to get my daughter to refer to me as Owen instead of Dad in front of the Hartwells. Clarissa, who kindly suggested that I might be more comfortable if I didn't give a speech at the ceremony. I folded the badge and put it in the pocket of his only good tie. No one else seemed to have noticed the deliberate humiliation. The other parents had gold badges with their full names and titles. The bridesmaids had small silk flowers attached to his. Even the photographer had a fancy name tag identifying his role. Only I had been marked as unwanted. I walked over to the gift table, where a mountain of boxes wrapped in gold and silver paper piled up like a small fortress of wealth. I placed my gift on top, a simple envelope containing something that would be worth much more than any item on that table. Inside was the deed to $40,000 in stocks that he had been secretly accumulating over the past 15 years. The dowry he planned to give Rebecca when she got married. What no one knew, not even his daughter, was that these stocks were part of a much larger portfolio. An estate I had quietly built while everyone saw me only as the electronics technician father who didn't fit into the glamorous world of the Hartwells. As I watched Clarissa laugh with her friends, probably commenting on the strange man who didn't belong in that sophisticated environment, I smiled for the first time that morning. If she wanted to treat me like a nobody, he would show her what a nobody really had. If you're enjoying this story of a father who discovered the true value of dignity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to see how this humiliation turned into the biggest turnaround the Hartwells ever imagined. Because sometimes, the ones who seem to have the least are the ones who really control the game. The first time I met Clarissa Hartwell was at a coffee shop near the campus where Rebecca studied architecture. She had just graduated and had been engaged to Jonathan for only 2 weeks. Clarissa arrived 15 minutes late, wearing Chanel sunglasses indoors and carrying a purse that cost more than his car. "So you're Rebecca's father," she said, extending an icy hand and scanning him from head to toe. His smile was calculated, the kind politicians use at rallies. "Jonathan has told us a lot about you." I knew immediately that a lot meant nothing good. During that first 45-minute conversation, Clarissa managed to suggest that Rebecca deserved a more sophisticated engagement party than I could afford, casually mention that Jonathan was used to a certain standard of living, ask if he had adequate resources to contribute to the wedding, and insinuate that my profession was interesting for someone Rebecca's age to meet different people. Different people. As if I were a charity project. But what really hurt was seeing Rebecca agree with every subtle comment. My son, who used to defend his father when schoolmates mocked his work uniform, now lowered his eyes and changed the subject whenever he talked about his job. The transformation wasn't sudden. Clarissa was smarter than that. It started with small suggestions. "Rebecca, dear, maybe you could talk to his dad about dressing a little nicer for family dinners. Or Jonathan gets uncomfortable when Owen tells those stories about work during dinner." Within 6 months, Rebecca started correcting him when he used slang or references she considered embarrassing. Within a year, she stopped visiting me on Sundays, our 20-year tradition. "I'm too busy with wedding preparations, Dad." Clarissa is teaching her about etiquette and event planning. Etiquette. As if I hadn't taught her good manners. The last straw was during the engagement dinner at the Hartwells' house. A colonial-style mansion that looked like something out of a magazine, with servants serving canapés whose names I couldn't pronounce. Clarissa made a point of introducing me to each guest in the same way. "This is Owen, Rebecca's father. He works with, what is it that he does, Owen?" She knew exactly what I did. She asked in front of each new person to watch me stammer out an explanation about electrical systems to people who looked right through me as if I were invisible. But the moment that broke me inside was when Rebecca stood up to give a little thank you speech. She spoke for 5 minutes about how Jonathan had introduced her to a new way of life. How the Hartwell family had opened her eyes to possibilities she never imagined. How she was grateful to have found people who truly valued her. 21 years raising my daughter alone. 21 years working double shifts to pay for her private school, her piano lessons, her college. 21 years being both father and mother at the same time. And she spoke as if her real life had only begun when she met the Hartwells. No one mentioned his name during that speech. Clarissa smiled at me across the table as Rebecca spoke, her eyes shining with cruel satisfaction. She had gotten exactly what she wanted, to erase his influence from her own daughter's life. After the party, when I tried to talk to Rebecca about how excluded I felt, she sighed as if he were a stubborn child. "Dad, you need to understand that this is a new phase in my life. I'm growing up, meeting influential people. I can't be stuck in the past." The past. 21 years of unconditional love had become the past. It was that night that I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing to try to fit into his world, I decided to show them who I really was. Not the humble technician he disdained, but the man who had turned every penny saved over decades into a fortune they couldn't even imagine. Because while Clarissa treated me like an obstacle to be removed, he had spent years removing financial obstacles she didn't even know existed. While she saw me as someone who didn't belong in her world, I was secretly buying pieces of that world. And while she planned my daughter's perfect wedding, he planned the biggest surprise of her life. What Clarissa didn't know was that the man she was trying to humiliate controlled more money than the entire Hartwell family combined. And in a few hours, she would find out exactly what happens when you underestimate someone based solely on his appearance. Because people like Clarissa always make the same mistake, they confuse simplicity with ignorance. And that mistake was about to cost her more than she could afford. The true extent of Clarissa's manipulation was revealed during the rehearsal dinner the night before the wedding. She had reserved a private room at the most exclusive country club in town, a place where he clearly didn't belong, but which she had chosen precisely for that reason. I arrived punctually at 7 in the evening, wearing my best suit, the one he had bought specifically for the occasion. Rebecca greeted me with a quick, formal hug, the kind you give distant acquaintances, not the man who raised him alone for 21 years. "Dad, you remember Mr. Hartwell," she said, introducing me to the family patriarch as if it were the first time we had met, even though we had already had dinner together 3 times. Edward Hartwell extended his hand with that political handshake that rich men have mastered perfectly, firm enough to seem sincere, but brief enough to make it clear that you're not important. "Owen, right? Jonathan told us you work in the technical field." Technical field. As if he were a TV repairman, not an electronic engineer specializing in corporate security systems. But what really hurt was realizing that Rebecca didn't correct her. My own daughter let them belittle him in front of a room full of people she wanted to impress. During dinner, he was strategically placed at the end of the table, away from the main conversations. Clarissa had orchestrated the seating so that he was between Jonathan's deaf aunt and a teenage cousin who couldn't stop fiddling with his cell phone. Meanwhile, she presided at the other end like a queen, controlling every topic of conversation. "We are so proud of Rebecca for finding a family that truly values her," Clarissa announced during the main course, raising her glass of wine that cost more than her monthly rent. "Sometimes the best gifts come when we least expect them." The guests toasted, but her words cut like glass. She was talking about me as if I were something Rebecca had outgrown, not his man who sacrificed everything to give her the opportunities that brought her there. It was during dessert that the situation became unbearable. Jonathan stood up to give a speech, thanking everyone for their presence and support. He talked about how Rebecca had blossomed since joining the Hartwell family. How she had discovered his true potential through the values and guidance that he had provided. 21 years. 21 years of working double shifts to pay for private school, piano lessons, summer courses, college. 21 years of reading bedtime stories, helping with homework, comforting her when she had nightmares. 21 years of being both father and mother. And here was a 26-year-old boy, who had known my daughter for only 2 years, taking credit for developing her. When Jonathan finished, the table applauded. Rebecca stood up and kissed his cheek, whispering something that made everyone laugh. No one looked at me. No one mentioned who had actually raised her. Clarissa smiled directly at me throughout the applause, his eyes shining with malicious triumph. She had achieved exactly what she wanted, to completely erase my relevance from the narrative of her own daughter's life. After dinner, I tried to get a moment alone with Rebecca. "Can we talk quickly?" I asked as she was saying goodbye to the guests. "Sure, Dad," she said, but his tone was distracted, impatient. We stepped out onto the club's terrace. The night was cool, and the city lights spread out below us like a map of possibilities. It was the kind of view we used to admire together when she was little, imagining all the places we would one day visit. "Rebecca, I feel like I'm losing you," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I know this is an important phase in her life, but it seems like there's no room for me in it anymore." She sighed, the same sigh she used to make when he said something she considered overly dramatic. "Dad, you're being too sensitive. No one is trying to exclude you." "Then why do I feel like a stranger at his wedding?" "Because you're making this all about you." The irritation in her voice caught me off guard. "This is his special day, and you're creating unnecessary drama." Unnecessary drama. The same words Clarissa used. "Rebecca, he raised you on his own since you were 3 years old. He never asked for recognition or gratitude, but he expected at least to be treated like family." "You are family," she said, but her voice was cold, distant. "But family doesn't mean that everything revolves around you. He's building a new life with new people. You should be happy for him." "I'm happy for you. But I don't understand why building a new life means destroying the old one." She looked at him as if he were a stubborn child who couldn't understand simple concepts. "Dad, you need to grow up. Stop clinging to the past and accept that things have changed. Grow up." The woman he raised was telling him to grow up. It was at that moment, there on the terrace, with the city lights witnessing my humiliation, that something changed inside me. It wasn't explosive anger or dramatic despair. It was something colder, more calculated. A crystal-clear understanding of who I really was and what I needed to do. "You're right," I said calmly. "Things really have changed." Rebecca seemed relieved, thinking I had finally accepted my diminished place in her life. "I'm glad you understand, Dad." But what she didn't understand was that my acceptance was not one of defeat. It was one of determination. As I walked back to my car that night, I passed Edward Hartwell talking to some friends near the valet. I heard snippets of her conversation: single father, not very sophisticated, at least Rebecca was lucky to find our family. He spoke of me as if I were a temporary obstacle that she had overcome, not the man who had made everything she had become possible. That was when I made my final decision. For 20 years, I had meticulously built up an investment portfolio that no one knew about. Stocks, bonds, real estate, urban development contracts. I had turned every penny I saved into something bigger, always thinking about my daughter's future. But if Rebecca had chosen a new family that saw him as irrelevant, maybe it was time to show them exactly how irrelevant he really was. Because while they treated me like I was worthless, I controlled more financial resources than the entire Hartwell family combined. And tomorrow, at the wedding, they would find out what happens when you underestimate someone based solely on appearances. Clarissa thought she had won by making he the unwelcome guest at her own daughter's wedding. But she was about to learn a lesson about real power versus perceived power. And the lesson would begin the next morning with a badge that said, "Nobody wants you," and end with a demonstration of just how much influence nobody can really have. The morning of the wedding arrived with a clarity she hadn't felt in months. As I shaved in the mirror of the small hotel where I was staying, I was no longer the defeated man Clarissa expected to see. I was someone who had spent the entire night turning humiliation into strategy. At 5 in the morning, I called Marcus Steinberg, my financial advisor and the only man who knew the true extent of his wealth. "Marcus, I need you to execute that operation we discussed last week. Today." "Owen, are you sure? That's 15 million in shares. Once we liquidate and transfer, there's no turning back." I've never been so sure of anything in my life. What no one knew, not even Rebecca, was that during my 20 years as an electronics technician, I had developed security systems for some of the largest corporations in the country. Each contract generated not only a salary, but also royalties from patents that I had discreetly registered. Each system installed, each upgrade, each maintenance job earned me percentages that quietly accumulated in strategic investments. While Clarissa saw me as a technician too humble for his social circle, I controlled a portfolio of $28 million in stocks, properties, and bonds. My investigation of the Hartwell family the previous week had revealed fascinating information. Edward Hartwell, the seemingly prosperous patriarch, was actually mortgaged up to his neck. The mansion where I had dined? Financed 80%. The import business that supported their luxurious lifestyle? It depended on 3 bank loans that would mature in the next 18 months. Clarissa drove a leased Mercedes and wore jewelry borrowed from a wealthy cousin in Connecticut. The country club where they had their rehearsal dinner? They owed $12,000 in overdue fees. But most interesting of all was that Jonathan, my daughter's fiancé, knew nothing about any of this. He genuinely believed he was marrying the heir to a solid fortune. Rebecca herself had been convinced that the Hartwells represented financial security for the rest of her life. All of Clarissa's arrogance, all of her condescension, all of her manipulation to exclude me from my daughter's life was built on a foundation of appearances and debt. As I finished getting dressed for the wedding, Marcus sent me the confirmation: transfer executed. $15 million net available in the checking account as requested. The lawyers are on standby. I put my phone away and picked up the second envelope I had prepared the night before. Inside, there wasn't $40,000 in stocks like the first gift. There was something much more valuable: documents proving that I had secretly purchased the mortgages on the Hartwell mansion and 2 of the commercial properties that supported Edward's business. Technically, as of that morning, I was the new owner of everything that supported the Hartwell family's front empire. But that was just the beginning. The third surprise was in the leather briefcase that would go to the wedding. Inside were consulting contracts that I had secretly prepared for Edward's 3 biggest competitors in the import business. Contracts that would give me exclusive access to information about suppliers, distribution routes, and pricing strategies that would render his business obsolete in 6 months. It wasn't cruel or destructive revenge. It was simply business. If Clarissa wanted to play a game where appearance and status determined value, I would show her how someone with real financial power plays that game. The fourth surprise was scheduled to be revealed during the ceremony. I had discreetly hired the same photographer and videographer that the Hartwells had chosen to document the wedding. The difference was that my version of the contract included exclusive rights to all images and recordings. Nothing would be given to the family without his explicit authorization. The fifth move had already been in progress since the previous week. Through connections I had developed over years of installing security systems, I gained access to the complete financial information that Edward had provided to the banks. Information that showed significant discrepancies between what he publicly declared and what he actually owned. Discrepancies that, if they came to the attention of the tax authorities, would generate auditors very interested in the family's true financial situation. If you are following this journey of a father who decided to stop accepting humiliation, subscribe to the channel to find out how the biggest surprise was yet to come, because when someone underestimates who really is, sometimes the best response is simply to show them the truth. But the sixth and most important part of his plan did not involve money, contracts, or property. It involved something much simpler and more devastating: documents proving that Jonathan had lied to Rebecca about her own financial situation. The young man my daughter was about to marry not only had no resources of his own, but was secretly $80,000 in debt due to online gambling he had incurred during college. Debts he hid from everyone, including his own parents. Rebecca was getting married thinking she had found financial security, when in fact she was taking on responsibility for a liability that no one knew about. As he put on his suit and adjusted his tie for the last time, he looked at his reflection in the mirror. He was no longer the man Clarissa thought she could humiliate with impunity. He was someone who had learned a valuable lesson about the difference between having power and demonstrating power. I picked up the 5 different folders I had prepared, each containing specific surprises for specific moments of the day, and walked toward the car. In 2 hours, I would arrive at my daughter's wedding not as the unwanted father Clarissa had tried to create, but as the man who secretly controlled the financial future of the entire Hartwell family. And when the Nobody Wants You badge was stuck on my table for the last time, I would finally show everyone exactly how much power nobody can really have. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying his enemies. It's simply revealing who he's always been beneath the appearances he's created about him. And I was about to reveal myself completely. The ballroom was in full swing when I arrived punctually at 2 in the afternoon. 200 elegantly dressed guests circulated among tables decorated with white and gold orchids, while a string orchestra played discreetly in the corner of the room. It was exactly the kind of event Clarissa had dreamed of, sophisticated, expensive, and completely under his control. Or at least that's what she believed. I walked straight to the gift table, where my first surprise was already waiting. The envelope with the $40,000 in stocks had been strategically placed on top of the pile, impossible to ignore. But next to him, discreetly positioned between two smaller gifts, was a second envelope that I had personally handed to the organizer an hour earlier. Clarissa spotted me from across the room and waved politely, the kind of wave you give to distant acquaintances you tolerate out of politeness. She wore a lilac dress that cost more than her monthly salary and walked with the confidence of someone who believed she controlled every aspect of this celebration. "Owen, I'm so glad you could make it," she said as she approached, her voice laden with that false cordiality I had learned to recognize. "I hope you feel comfortable here with us." "Thank you, Clarissa. It's a truly impressive event." I smiled calmly. "It must have cost a fortune." His smile faltered for a millisecond. "Well, when it comes to Rebecca's happiness, no investment is too great." Investment. The word hung in the air between us like a premonition. The ceremony began at 3 o'clock sharp. Rebecca was radiant in his $16,000 dress, a price I had accidentally discovered when Marcus intercepted the Hartwells' credit card bills during his financial investigation. As she walked down the aisle accompanied by Edward, who pretended not to notice her steady gaze, he stood like all the other guests. But unlike the others, she was counting the minutes. At 3:45, during the newlyweds' first waltz, her phone vibrated discreetly. Marcus had sent a single word: executed. The first phase of her plan had officially begun. At 4 o'clock, as the guests headed for dinner, I saw Clarissa receive a call on his cell phone. I watched his face gradually change from casual irritation to genuine concern as she moved away from the crowd to talk privately. The call was from the bank. He was informing her that all of the Hartwell family's mortgages had been transferred to a new lender, and that the payment terms needed to be renegotiated immediately. The new owner of the debts was requesting an urgent meeting the following Monday. Clarissa didn't know it yet, but the new lender was a company I controlled through a series of elaborately structured holding companies. At 4:15 p.m., Edward received her own call. 3 of his largest suppliers were simultaneously canceling contracts, citing conflicts of interest with new exclusive partners. These contracts represented 60% of his import business's annual revenue. The new exclusive partners were companies for which I had been providing financial consulting services since the previous week. At 4:30, Jonathan was discreetly summoned by a man in a gray suit who identified himself as a legal representative. The conversation lasted only 5 minutes, but it was enough for the groom's face to lose all color. The representative had delivered documents proving that Jonathan's online gambling debts, $80,000 he had hidden from everyone, had been purchased by an investment fund. The same fund was offering a payment agreement that required complete financial transparency, including disclosure to spouses. Rebecca still didn't know that he was marrying someone who owed more money than she would earn in 2 years. It was during dinner that Clarissa finally came to see him. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached my table, where I was quietly eating my grilled salmon, seemingly oblivious to the chaos that was beginning to unfold around us. "Owen, I need to talk to you," she said quietly, trying to maintain her composure in front of the other guests. "Sure, Clarissa. Is everything okay? You seem tense." She leaned in close, her voice now an urgent whisper. "There have been some strange coincidences today. Unexpected financial problems. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" I finished my bite of salmon before responding. "What kind of problems?" "Our banks, our business contracts, even Jonathan's personal matters. Everything starting to fall apart on the same day as her wedding." Her eyes studied him intently. "It seems a little too suspicious to be a coincidence." "Clarissa," I said calmly, wiping my mouth with my napkin, "do you think a simple electronics technician would have the resources or connections to orchestrate the kind of financial operation you're implying?" The question caught her off guard. Because, of course, the obvious answer was no. In her mind, I was just the out-of-place father who didn't belong in that sophisticated world. "You're right," she murmured. "I'm being paranoid. It must just be a difficult day. Probably, I agreed. Sometimes problems come all at once. It's part of life. She nodded and walked away, but not before he casually added, "By the way, Clarissa, could you tell me where I can find the event organizer? I'd like to make an additional donation to the bride and groom." An additional donation? Something modest. Just 15 million in stocks to help the young couple start their life together. The words came out of my mouth as naturally as commenting on the weather. Clarissa blinked several times, processing what she had heard. 15 million? In stocks, yes. I was saving it as a surprise. I smiled kindly. I hope it's not too extravagant for such a simple event. It was at that moment that Clarissa really looked at me for the first time. Not as the awkward technician that she tolerated out of necessity, but as someone who had just mentioned a sum of money greater than the combined net worth of her entire family. "Owen," she said slowly, "where exactly would he get $15 million? I took out my phone and opened the banking app, turning the screen toward her. The checking account balance showed $17.2 million available. "From investments I've made over the years," I replied simply. "Patents, royalties, shares in tech companies. Things an electronics technician can accumulate when he has a long-term vision." Clarissa's face went through a fascinating sequence of expressions. First disbelief, then confusion, followed by a slow, horrified realization. "You," she whispered, "you're rich." I finished the sentence. Yes, Clarissa. Very rich. Richer than her entire family combined, in fact. At that moment, Edward came running up, his face red with stress. "Clarissa, we need to talk now. It's about the contracts, the loans, everything is." He stopped abruptly when he saw our intimate conversation. "Edward," Clarissa said tensely, "do you remember Owen? Rebecca's father? The technician?" Edward looked at me with ill-concealed irritation. "Yes, of course. What about him? He just told me he intends to give us $15 million as a wedding gift." Edward's expression changed as if someone had flipped a switch. 15 million? "That's right," I confirmed. "And I would also like to inform you that I am the new owner of the mortgages on his properties. I purchased them this morning through intermediaries." The silence that followed was deafening. Even with the orchestra playing and the other guests chatting, it felt as if a vacuum bubble had formed around us. Edward was the first to find his voice. "That's impossible. You're just a electronics technician," I finished. "Yes, I am. An electronics technician who holds patents on security systems used by half the Fortune 500 corporations. A technician who has turned royalties into a $28 million portfolio over 20 years. Clarissa leaned on a nearby chair, her composure finally crumbling. "You did this on purpose. All this humiliation, all this manipulation of Rebecca against you. You knew you could destroy us at any moment." "Destroy?" I shook my head. "Clarissa, I didn't destroy anything. I just bought assets that you used as collateral to maintain a lifestyle you couldn't really afford. And now it's his decision, the terms of payment." Edward tried to regain some authority. "You can't do that. There are laws, contracts." "Contracts you signed," I interrupted. "Laws I followed meticulously. Everything I did was perfectly legal. In fact, I used the same kind of financial aggression that men like you call good business when it's him doing it." That's when Jonathan appeared, clearly panicked. "Mr. Hartwell, we need to talk about that document I received. The debts you mentioned, I never told Rebecca about." He stopped when he saw our little gathering. "Jonathan," I said calmly, "her gambling debts. $80,000. Does Rebecca know about them?" The young man turned even paler. "How did you?" "Because I bought those debts too. This morning." I looked at Clarissa and Edward. "Your children are getting married based on a foundation of financial lies. Rebecca believes she is entering a prosperous family, when in fact she is taking responsibility for debts that neither of you had the courage to admit." Clarissa finally exploded. "Why are you doing this? Rebecca is his daughter." "Exactly," I replied, my voice becoming firmer. "Rebecca is my daughter. The daughter he raised alone for 21 years. The daughter whose needs he prioritized over his own for more than 2 decades. And you've spent the last few months turning her against him, treating him like an embarrassment, like someone who should be tolerated and then forgotten. I pointed to the badge I had folded and tucked into my pocket. You literally labeled me "nobody wants you" at her daughter's wedding. Well, now nobody controls his mortgages, his business contracts, and the debts of his future son-in-law. Edward tried a different approach. Owen, maybe we can talk about this like businessmen. I'm sure we can come to an agreement. Oh, but we've already come to an agreement, I smiled. You agreed to the terms when you signed the original contracts. Now only the hands that control those contracts have changed. At that moment, Rebecca appeared, still radiant in his wedding dress, curious about the small tense group that had formed. Dad? Clarissa? Is everything okay here? Clarissa and Edward exchanged desperate glances. How would they explain to the bride that the family she thought she had joined was financially ruined, and that the father she had been manipulated into discarding was actually the richest person at the party? Everything is perfect, dear, Clarissa said in a tense voice. Just talking business. Rebecca looked at him, and for a moment I saw a glimpse of the daughter he had raised. Dad, are you okay? Something seems to have happened. It was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment to choose between complete revenge and redemption. Between completely destroying those who had humiliated him or offering them a chance to rebuild. Rebecca, I said softly, there are some things about our family, about me, that you should perhaps know. Because while Clarissa and Edward frantically calculated how to get out of that financial hole, I was about to reveal to Rebecca that the father he had learned to dismiss was actually the only person at that party with real power to secure her future. And the choice of how to use that power would be his. Rebecca, I repeated softly, watching my daughter process the palpable tension around us, there are some things you need to know about who I really am. Clarissa tried to interrupt. Owen, maybe this isn't the time. Actually, I said firmly, this is exactly the time. I turned to Rebecca. Honey, do you believe that, in marrying into a prosperous family, you secure his financial security? Rebecca nodded, confused. Of course, Dad. The Hartwells are successful, they have an established business. Jonathan, I called, and the young man approached reluctantly, his face still pale. Tell her about the gambling debts. The $80,000 you've been hiding from her. The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca looked at Jonathan with an expression that quickly changed from confusion to disbelief. Jonathan? What is he talking about? I can explain, Jonathan stammered. It's just a few online bets, nothing serious. $80,000 is not nothing serious, I interrupted. And they're not the only lies in this family. I turned to Edward and Clarissa. Would you like to tell Rebecca about the mortgages that he can no longer afford? About the business contracts that he lost today? About how the prosperity he offered my daughter is actually a mountain of debt? Clarissa was visibly shaking now. Rebecca, dear, these are just temporary difficulties. Temporary. I laughed without humor. You owe over $2 million in mortgages, you have canceled contracts that represent 60% of your annual income, and my daughter's fiancé lied about debts that could destroy her financial future. Rebecca looked at him as if it were the first time she had really seen him. Dad, how do you know all this? Because, I said calmly, taking out my phone and showing her the bank statement again, I bought all those debts this morning. He's the new creditor for the entire Hartwell family. Rebecca's expression went through a sequence of emotions, shock, confusion, and then something I hadn't seen in months, respect. You have $28 million, she whispered. I do. Accumulated over 20 years of creating security systems, registering patents, investing in technology. All while working double shifts to give you the best education possible. Tears began to form in Rebecca's eyes. Dad, I didn't know. You didn't know because you chose to listen to people who painted me as an embarrassment, I replied, my voice softening slightly. People who made you believe that true love comes with price tags and social status. Clarissa made one last desperate attempt. Rebecca, don't let he destroy his marriage out of jealousy. Destroy. I looked directly at Clarissa. I could have destroyed you financially and legally. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to offer you something that she never offered me, a second chance. I took a folder out of my jacket. Here are the new terms. Jonathan has 6 months to pay off his gambling debts by working in a rehabilitation program that I will finance. Edward and Clarissa have 2 years to reorganize their finances with professional financial advice, also funded by me. And you will treat me as her father, not as an obstacle to be removed. I extended my hand to Clarissa. You spent months trying to humiliate him, but I choose to turn this experience into a lesson for all of us. Real power isn't about destroying others. It's about building something better. Clarissa looked at my outstretched hand, then at Rebecca's face, which was now shining with tears of pride. Slowly, she accepted my handshake. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. He was terrible to you." "You were," he agreed. "But we all deserve a chance to grow." Rebecca came over and hugged me for the first time in months. "Dad, forgive me for doubting you." "Honey," I said, holding her tightly, "you're his daughter. There's nothing to forgive, just lessons to learn." That night, as the guests said their goodbyes, Rebecca came to me one last time. "Dad, why didn't you tell me about the money before?" I smiled, adjusting a strand of hair that had escaped from his hairstyle. "Because I wanted you to love me for the father I've always been, not for the wealth I've accumulated. Money is just a tool. The love I've given you for 21 years? That's true wealth." 3 months later, I received a letter from Jonathan. He had completed the rehabilitation program and was working honestly to pay off her debts. The letter ended with, "Thank you for teaching me that real strength comes from facing problems, not hiding them." Edward transformed his business with the help of financial consulting, focusing on ethics and transparency. Clarissa began volunteering at a community center, learning to value people for who they are, not how much they have. And Rebecca? She learned the greatest lesson of all, that dignity is priceless, but respect must be earned every day. If this story of a father who turned humiliation into wisdom touched his heart, subscribe to the channel. Here we share stories of people who have discovered that true power is not in bringing others down, but in lifting up everyone around him. Today, when I look back, I don't see the "nobody wants you" badge as an offense. I see it as the exact moment when I discovered that someone who really matters has always wanted himself. And sometimes, that's the only approval he really needs.